I will tell you my terrifying story. My name is Randa. I'm from Egypt, and I'm now around 34 years old. This story happened to me many years ago, when I was 18. Despite all the time that has passed, I still remember it vividly, because it was an experience that's impossible to forget. Once you hear my story, you'll understand why I'm saying this. At that time, my father bought a new house. Its price was strangely cheap compared to its large size, and it was an opportunity that couldn't be missed. My father couldn't believe his luck back then, especially since the price was much lower than its actual value. We were 5 siblings, so I wasn't alone. On our first day in the new house, we were exhausted after a long day of organizing and moving furniture. We all fell asleep quickly, but shortly after midnight, we woke up terrified by a loud noise, as if part of the house had collapsed. We jumped up in fear, thinking the house was falling down, and rushed out to ask the neighbors what had happened. But they told us they hadn't heard anything. We were shocked because we had all heard the noise. It wasn't just our imagination. We tried to convince ourselves that maybe it was just an illusion. To be clear, we lived in a popular area called Al-Warak. The apartment above us was occupied by some mischievous kids from our neighbors, who were always making noise, running and stomping around all night long. We thought the noise might have been caused by those kids, or maybe one of the neighbors moving furniture. But the biggest shock came when we discovered that the apartment above us was completely empty. Its owners had left after their young son died. He had fallen into the air shaft while playing with a kite from the 5th floor. After the boy died, his grandmother boiled yellow lentils and scattered them on the floor and hammered nails into the ground, claiming she was trying to drive away the boy's spirit to stop it from staying in the house. Although I used to think this was just old wives' tales, my neighbor said something that day that was so strange it left me unable to sleep out of sheer terror. My neighbor, pale-faced and wide-eyed with fear, told me that she and her family had been hearing the sound of cats on the stairs. I thought to myself that this was normal in a crowded neighborhood. But what was strange was that she insisted the cats were speaking in bizarre human voices. At first, I didn't believe it and dismissed it as superstition, but the shock came when my siblings and I started hearing those voices too, sometimes as if they were conversations between humans. There was one black cat in particular that frightened me a lot. I would always see it sitting on the stairs, staring at me in a terrifying way, as if it wanted to tell me something. I didn't understand what was going on, but the feeling of fear intensified every time I saw it. At that time, I was working in a pharmacy alongside my studies. A strange incident happened at the clinic next door, where the doctor suddenly died under mysterious circumstances. After his death, the clinic began to be emptied of its contents. The secretary who worked with him, and who was my friend, told me that the doctor's wife had asked for his books to be discarded. She said to me, "Take some of the books, you might need them for your studies." I went and took a few books, but there was one strange book that caught my attention. I don't remember its exact title, but it was about alternative medicine and treating witchcraft. I took the book home with me and left it for a while without opening it. But after some time, I began to hear breathing sounds near my ear every night as I slept. I would wake up terrified, not knowing the source of the sounds. Finally, I decided to open the book and read it. I chose a quiet time, turned on a dim light, and started reading. I was scared that my father might wake up and find me with the book, as he was very strict, and we were all afraid of him despite our deep love for him. The book was filled with strange symbols and drawings, along with bizarre instructions, like repeating incomprehensible phrases. Foolishly, I began repeating the phrases without realizing what I was doing. After that, I felt sleepy and went to bed. When I woke up in the morning, I felt like something was wrong with me. My skin had turned darker and my eyes were swollen. My mother said it was just a cold, but I knew what had happened to me was something much more than that. One afternoon, the sheikh who was teaching my brother the Quran came to our house. I heard the sound of Quran recitation, and without realizing it, I walked into the room and violently hit a Sheikh Sharif. No one could believe what I had done. My father, mother, and brother held me down, and the sheikh began to recite the Quran over me, but they were struggling to control me. Eventually I calmed down and apologized to the sheikh, but I didn't understand how I could have done such a thing. Afterward, I began to notice strange changes in my voice and started hearing the sound of a small child crying and then laughing. I would even see him sitting on a chair. When I told my mother, she didn't believe me and said I was just making excuses to avoid doing house chores. One night, I was sitting alone in the dark, continuing to read the strange book. While I was reading, I felt something touch my hand. Fear overwhelmed me, but I didn't dare move. Suddenly I was startled by the sound of my younger sister asking me about the book in a frightened voice. She told me I was staring at her in a terrifying way. I began acting even more strangely, and my mother noticed the changes. I started interpreting the family's dreams with eerie accuracy, to the point where what I predicted actually came true. Everyone became afraid of me. Concerned for my condition, my mother took me to a sheikh named Sheikh Islam. He placed headphones on my ears to listen to Quranic recitation and asked me what was happening. I laughed in a strange voice and told him about people standing next to him holding swords inscribed with, "There is no God but Allah." He refused to acknowledge my condition and sent us away. My mother didn't give up and took me to a woman named Mona, but she didn't seem capable of helping. My brother, who was studying at Al-Azhar University, mentioned my case to one of his classmates, who informed a sheikh named Sheikh Hisham. After hearing the story, the sheikh visited us with another person from Al-Azhar. They asked me to hand over the strange book I had been reading. When I mentioned the book, the sheikh said I needed immediate treatment. He took the book and told me it shouldn't stay with me any longer. At that moment, I noticed that my body was getting strangely hot. The sheikh told me that the book might be the cause of everything I was going through and instructed me to follow the treatment to rid myself of the affliction. My life changed completely after what happened. I started speaking in different voices, sometimes in the voice of a man, sometimes a woman, and other times a child. My family thought I was mentally ill, so they decided to take me to a psychiatrist in secret so that people wouldn't call me crazy, especially since this could affect my future marriage prospects. In our neighborhood, going to a psychiatrist is considered shameful. We went to many doctors. Some said I had split personality disorder, while others said I was completely normal and had no issues. But my condition didn't improve, and things remained the same. My mother, like any Egyptian mother, was preparing me and my older sister for marriage. One day, she placed a blanket and a sheet on the big wardrobe, but after I left the room, I found them thrown on the floor. I put them back in place, but they fell again, as if someone had deliberately tossed them. I told my mother what had happened, and she said, "Leave them on the floor until one of your brothers puts them back properly." I left them and went to watch TV, but I saw a shadow pass in front of the screen. I asked my mother and siblings if any of them had walked past the TV, but they all said no one had. I started to feel like I was imagining things, but I was sure of what I had seen. After that, my father brought in 4 sheikhs, 3 from our neighborhood and 1 from outside. As soon as the last sheikh entered the house, I felt an intense fear and asked them to take him away, because I sensed he was the strongest of them all. The sheikhs started reciting the Quran in the house. They made me drink water they had recited over, and they sprinkled the floors with it as well. While they were reading, I felt the presence of a small child playing and moving from one place to another. I couldn't fully grasp everything that was happening around me. Later, they told me that when I had read that strange book I got from the late doctor's clinic, I had unknowingly summoned a jinn. I also found out later that I had come into contact with a magic spell that wasn't meant for me, but it affected me because I touched it by mistake. That spell had been placed at the home of a Christian neighbor of ours, and the jinn that possessed me was also Christian. During that time, I would make strange movements, draw crosses, and speak in terrifying voices. The sheikhs continued their work for 4 days, reciting the Quran continuously between prayers and sprinkling the house with blessed water. They told me that jinn often leave through the feet, and that's exactly what happened. However, it left behind some horrible marks on my foot. Thank God I'm healed now, and I'm married with 2 children. Sometimes I feel the presence of small children playing and laughing in the apartment, but they never harm me, and I've grown used to their presence. Alhamdulillah for everything.